RFK Jr. sticking it to the Democratic Party and Joe Biden during a Hannity town hall. The candidate vowing to stand up for free speech on day one of his presidency and to end the weaponization of government.
I want to end that polarization, and I want to do that by telling the truth. The first step we have to take is to tell the truth. Have a president who's willing to tell the truth about everything. People in this country know that the system is rigged, and they know that they're being lied to. I'm going to issue an executive order the moment I get into the White House, the first day, forbidding of ending the weaponization of our agencies for political purposes.
RFK Jr. also giving bedwetting Democrats more reasons to be nervous after he openly questioned Joe's fitness for office.
He's never been very good with words. The decisions that are coming out of the White House are bad decisions. Right. And, you know, the Democratic Party does not censor people, in my experience. We're not the party of war. We're not the party of the neocons dictating foreign policy. We're the party of the middle class, and we're the party of working people. And that's not where the party is anymore.
And proving RFK Jr.'s point on Biden's words, the president just made this stunning claim about cancer.
If you could do anything at all, Joe, what would you do? I said I'd cure cancer. They looked at me like, why cancer? Because no one thinks we can. That's why, and we can. We'd end the cancer as we know it.
What? Yeah, that's a new one. We ended cancer as we know it. Dana, RFK kept it classy. He wouldn't go make any personal attacks on Biden. He disagreed, obviously, with a lot of his positions. But is it possible to win as a Democrat today while criticizing the White House?
Well, those are great questions. He does keep it classy, but he is going after Biden in a way that exposes the weakness. So if Biden were a stronger frontrunner, there would be much less oxygen for RFK. But the Biden White House, they barely make any news. If they are making news, it's about taking away your freedoms and appliances. And they're so focused on climate change. Then they're having to answer lots of questions. They're on the defense, on their back foot on Hunter Biden. And they're trying to tell us that Bidenomics is working. And if you look at the polls, that's just absolutely not the case. But chaos loves a vacuum, right? And so RFK Jr. is filling that spot. I've always maintained that if RFK really wants to be president, he should run as a third party. Because in the Democratic primary, he's not going to win. He's just not. Like, the Democrats don't like him. A lot of Republicans might like, or conservatives, or people who are unaffiliated. 40% of the country says they're independent. They're not Republicans or Democrats. And he could speak to them. And I just don't understand. I understand why he doesn't. There is family tradition, and that is a big deal to leave your party. But there's some people today saying, wow, even the Boston Globe went against him. The Boston Globe's been going against RFK for quite a long time. Even members of his own family have been going against him. I think this shows the fact that RFK is a little bit, he has shades of Bernie Sanders, where he can give Joe Biden a really hard time. But when it comes down to it, the Democratic machine, the party is going to stick with their frontrunner.
You know, Harold, what Dana just posited was my question to you, and that is, I mean, given the fact that, RFK thinks that his own party has gone too far left, is he a candidate for a third party in this presidential election? Should he be?
I don't know. I know he's running in the Democratic primary. I think Dana's right. I think Dana's right on that point, and I think Dana's right that there's a vacuum at the White House. President Biden, if I were part of that campaign team, I'd have him out once or twice a week giving big speeches on where the country is and where we're going and how his leadership is going to help advance us there. When I listened to RFK Jr. at the start of his campaign, and we talked about him here, and Greg, I thought, talked eloquently about him and his candidacy from the standpoint of he's speaking to a part of the country. He's speaking to middle-class aspirations and values. I don't agree with him on his position on the war, but he has veered in the last few weeks talking about conspiracy theories. If you look at his polling data, he's come down a little bit in the polls, and I think the vaccines and even the words about Israel and Jewish Americans, that's not why I think people were interested or tantalized by his campaign from the outset. If he wants to get back to the Kennedy Camelot mode, he's got to talk again about those middle-class family issues, those middle-class aspirations and values, and how the wealth gap is worsened and what he will do to address that. I don't think what he's doing now is helping to advance his campaign.
You know, Greg, 65% of Americans think that the country is too divided. One of the reasons Joe Biden was elected is because he said he was going to unify us. If that's the case, why are so many people supporting Biden and not RFK?
Team sport, perhaps. But he did say two things that were interesting to me. The system is rigged and Americans are being lied to. Who does that sound like?
Exactly.
Donald Trump.
Yep.
Thank you, Harold.
Yeah.
I thought it was a quiz.
Yeah. But before I pay compliments to Kennedy, I gotta say that I have to bring up what Jessica says, that when Republicans embrace someone who's running for president on the other side, you should suspect it's not purely for altruistic purposes. So I mean, a lot of Republicans really do like him, but it's probably because he could really hurt Joe. But the problem with the party, and this is why I think he should run as a third-party candidate, because I do think he would win, is because his party's radical elements, what we call the woke, have embraced this fascist clampdown on language, which is what we were referring to. If you have opinions that aren't accepted by that group, they will come after you. They will try to destroy you. It's one of the most substantial political and moral flips in history, recent history, where the party that fueled the free speech movement is now fueling its opposite. It's incredible. I mean, they talk about the banning of books, and they can't cite one, but they are constantly targeting people for speech, for language, opinions, all the time. The White House is going after private citizens over speech. It's incredible. So I think that I also wanted just one last point. I do think, I thought his analysis of the war was dead on. We don't talk about the war that much anymore because there's not a lot of good news coming out of there. And it's hard for conservative Republicans and, to admit that America has a role in this happening. 20 years ago, I wouldn't buy into it, but the world has changed, and he's challenging my assumptions. And I think he's in a weird way another flip. You're seeing Republicans who are becoming anti-war and Democrats pro-war.
Can I mention one thing? He has a net approval of plus 12, which is a lot higher than Joe Manchin. So if Joe Manchin is thinking about running as a third party, that's another data point.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay, Jesse. So even as Republicans come to RFK's defense, and I heard a lot of things that I like too, and I think a lot of Americans would like. His polls have been down. Does this show how much the media is, it has allied with Joe Biden and the administration?
I don't know if they're down that much, and there's room for him to improve because we're just getting started. But I don't believe anything these politicians promise at this point. When you get in there and you promise to end polarization, that's not happening. I mean, they've been stoking, this is my fire poker move, this polarization for 2 decades now with social media, right? It's going to take a generation for us to maybe even try to start liking each other. And then he's going to say, well, I'm going to come in and I'm going to end the weaponization of government on day one by an executive order. Yeah. Nice try. I think the FBI and the CIA are going to have something to say about that. And he's going to be a president to tell the truth. Well, we had a president that told the truth, and they investigated him and impeached him twice. Again, good luck with that. But when Greg's saying there's an overlap and it's building from the left, from the right. It's populist, and Americans agree. I'd say 70%. They're anti-crime. They're for a secure border. They are pro-middle class. They have a little bit more of an isolationist tilt to them. There's that juicy middle in American politics that they don't want to foster because that breaks the system in half. But if we can get it together, we'll get there.
Okay.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.